In November of last year, the Poco M3 is kind of like into existence. And it was a very important smartphone. Why? Because it was a cheap smartphone and it had great specs for the money. In fact, it was like so good that if you wanted to buy a smartphone for about 600 to 700 ringgit, the answer was buy beli Poco. But then just 2 months later in January of this year, Xiaomi Malaysia also launched the Redmi 9T. Holy crap, it was basically the same smartphone. In fact, it might just be a little bit better. And the best part, both of these smartphones are priced exactly the same. And you know, when smartphones are priced exactly the same, it's my time to shine because I'm going to be putting these two smartphones camera bump to camera bump, dewdrop notch to dewdrop notch, right against each other in a comparison. Which smartphone should you buy? Let's find out. Before we start this comparison, I just want to clarify one thing really quick. Both of these smartphones are entry-level devices, okay? They are cheap phones for the entry level, so you shouldn't be expecting flagship performance or flagship build quality or anything like that. But if the smartphone is like sluggish or laggy, or if it feels really plasticky, I am going to call them out. I am going to say that it's laggy and plasticky because just because it is a cheap smartphone doesn't suddenly make like a laggy smartphone not laggy. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get on to the first segment. On paper, these smartphones definitely have some of the best specs at the price point. You don't get some random unnamed processor at their core. Instead, both devices get Snapdragon 662 processors with Adreno 610 GPUs. On top of that, you're also getting either 64 or 128 gigs of UFS storage, which is honestly very generous. With the triple slot SIM tray, you can even expand storage with a micro SD card without sacrificing a SIM slot. With the Poco M3, you're getting 4 gigs of LPDDR4X RAM across the board, while the Redmi 9T will net you either 4 gigs or 6 gigs of LPDDR4X memory depending on the configuration. Those definitely look like good specs on paper, but you have to remember that these are still entry-level devices, so performance is sluggish to say the least. Everything always takes more than a moment to respond. You can tap on an app or an action and there's always like a brief pause before anything happens. It's almost like you can see the phone thinking about like what you did just before kicking into action. It's like, did he tap on the camera icon? Go. That unfortunately also means that these are not gaming smartphones. Not very capable ones at least. Trying to run stuff like Genshin Impact even on like the lowest graphical setting is like playing the game on PowerPoint slides. You can almost count the FPS as you swipe around. A more optimized game like Asphalt 9 is mostly playable on medium to low settings, but if you try to run anything higher, the phone just it just grinds to a halt. As far as thermals go, they both get pretty warm to the touch after just over like 10 minutes of gameplay. Interestingly, however, I actually got an overheating warning from the Redmi 9T while I was updating Genshin Impact, something I didn't experience on the Poco M3. That said, I didn't run into any issues while I was actually playing the game on the smartphone, but it could also be because I gave up after a few minutes because it was basically unplayable. Probably the biggest plus in these smartphone specs are their 6000 mAh batteries. These are truly massive cells, and considering the specs for each phone, you should expect, identical battery performance. They also support 18-watt fast charging, but both smartphones include 22.5-watt fast chargers in the box. The similarities don't end there either. Both devices come with 6.53-inch Full HD Plus LCD displays. Now, I really like that both smartphones have Full HD Plus resolutions because this is the kind of thing that, manufacturers like to skimp on first. But you can definitely tell that these aren't high-end displays. For starters, there's no fast refresh rate or anything like that, but the most noticeable thing for me is the fact that there is a significant dip in brightness when viewing this phone, like even slightly off axis. Then again, you shouldn't be expecting like the most advanced LCD on a smartphone, at this kind of price point. Right at this kind of price point, I'm just happy that we get full HD screens. And at this size, they're actually pretty decent for media consumption as long as you're not viewing off axis. Xiaomi has also bundled both phones with earpiece stereo speakers to amp up the audio experience. Are they great? Not really, but they're good enough for the price point. They have a pretty nice and full sound coming from the speakers, even though it's like a little bit muddy. Though I do wish that there was just a little bit more volume. To say that the new Reno 5 is a head-turner would be an understatement. Especially in this galactic silver colorway, the Reno 5 is one of the brightest smartphones I've seen to date. The color also shifts and changes depending on how the light hits it, which isn't new, but is still very much an attention grabber. I think the sheer brightness of the color has to do with the new textured back design that Oppo has gone for. They call it the Diamond Spectrum process with a Reno glow. On the inside, the Oppo Reno 5 is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G processor. That said, if you want better audio, the nice thing is that you can just plug in a pair of wired headphones because both devices come with 3.5mm headphone jacks. So as far as performance, there really isn't much that separates these two smartphones. But where they probably differ the most is with their cameras. Poco's M3 features a triple camera setup at the back. You get a main 48MP wide camera, a 2MP macro camera, and a 2MP depth camera. On the other hand, the Redmi 9T features a quad camera module instead. You still get a 48MP wide camera and the 2MP depth as well as the 2MP macro cameras, but now you get an additional 8MP ultra wide camera. As far as the main camera goes, I think both of them produce very similar results. There is not a ton of detail and the colors definitely looked a little bit washed out even with AI turned on. I would definitely avoid using these smartphones for low light photography because the results are quite unusable. They don't have much detail with night mode off, and even when you switch night mode on, there's still plenty of color and luminance noise. Interestingly, while they use the same 48MP wide cameras, the camera UI and functions are slightly different between the two. On the Redmi 9T, you get the 3 toggle switches for the various preset zoom ranges, but with the M3, you don't get any of that. Maybe it's because the Redmi 9T has the ultra-wide camera, but that still shouldn't stop them from, including the 2x zoom since both of these smartphones use similar digital zooming. Regardless, it's the image quality that we're looking at here. And at 2x, well, it looks like digital zoom, which means that it's usable, but there's not a ton of detail or clarity. The Redmi 9T definitely has the edge when it comes to versatility since it has that extra ultra-wide camera. However, image quality isn't really great either. It has that CCTV kind of look to the photos, but then again, at this price point, this isn't very surprising. I was, however, very impressed with the portrait mode because of the quality of the bokeh and the edge detection. I think that the M3 has slightly better exposure and skin tone, but the difference isn't very huge. On the selfie front, the Poco M3's image is much warmer and has a slight green tint to it, while the 9T has a much cooler color temperature with a magenta tint instead. Kind of weird considering, the similarities in software and also the same kind of 8MP selfie hardware. I suppose it's not really a big surprise that, for the most part, these cameras take very similar photos because, they have pretty much identical hardware, but I do like the fact that the Redmi 9T has the extra ultra-wide camera because, I like that little bit of versatility. Finally though, let's wrap this whole thing up with the build and also some of the other features that I haven't mentioned. Let's be real here. At below 700 ringgit, you're not going to get any of the fancy materials you'd see in high-end smartphones. These are definitely in the fantastic in plastic category of device. But I have to say that the phones certainly feel comfortable to hold in the hand, even if they're mostly made out of plastic. The edges are nicely rounded so that you can comfortably grip these devices, even though they've got a pretty massive footprint. The buttons have a nice click to them, and the fingerprint scanner plus power button combo is in a comfortable spot to reach. Now, this position isn't my favorite because, I'd much rather have a rear-mounted or front-mounted scanner, but the accuracy and reliability has been pretty good so far. Having a fingerprint scanner is also definitely useful in a world where we're all wearing masks. Both phones also come with an IR blaster, which is always useful, and MIUI 12 out of the box. There are a couple of little tweaks that Poco has added to the M3 software, like the hidden apps drawer, but besides that, it's pretty much the same skin. I have this very loud orange Redmi 9T here alongside the muted black Poco M3, and there are definitely design differences despite how similar these smartphones are. Most noticeable of which is the camera bump. While the Redmi 9T opts for a conventional design, the Poco M3 prefers to go, all out with a pretty bold look that stretches across the back of the phone. Which is nicer. It's kind of like a toss-up for me, but I did notice something quite interesting with the backs of the smartphone. The M3 uses this faux leather textured plastic back that's surprisingly quite the smudge magnet. Grime gets stuck there and it's quite hard to get rid of even if you really try to wipe it down. On the other hand, the concentric circle design on the back of the Redmi 9T definitely does a better job at rejecting smudges. To be honest, there's really not much that separates these two devices. In fact, when they first launched, we were like, wait, did they launch the same smartphone again? And to a certain degree, they kind of did. These phones perform so similarly that choosing between them is either really hard or really easy. For me though, it's really very easy. Just buy the one that's cheaper, or the one that's on sale when you plan to buy it, or the one that you think looks a little bit nicer, because from a usability standpoint, I think both of these smartphones are really super similar. There's basically no difference. The only notable upgrade is the ultra-wide camera and the extra 2 gigs of RAM that you will get on the Redmi 9T's top spec model. So if they were at the same price, then I definitely think that the Redmi 9T offers more value for money. But if you want a pro tip from me, I would tell you to just save up a little bit more money and buy the Poco X3 NFC. Purely from an experience standpoint alone, the X3 NFC is, already a much better device. It's just so much smoother and more responsive. Plus, you get the really nice 120Hz screen, which is just way nicer to use than these 60Hz panels. And you can get all of that for just 200 ringgit more for the base model. But if you really cannot afford that 200 ringgit and you have to choose between these two smartphones, I think the Redmi 9T is better, especially if they're both priced exactly the same. But that's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you own any of these smartphones? Are you thinking of buying any of these smartphones? And of course, let me know if I missed anything in this comparison. I love to read your comments, even though they sometimes hurt my feelings. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it helped you. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell icon. It's a new year. We've got plenty of content lined up, so you don't want to miss any of that. You can also follow us on Facebook or visit us in our home on the internet at soyachinchao.com. Until the next video, I'm Rory and I'll see you then. Bye bye.